This video is the 7th in a 10-part series on the Bitcoin Standard, a book by economist Safdin Ammous. This series includes 10 videos, one for each chapter of the book, and this video focuses on the information contained within Chapter 7. Chapter 7: Sound Money and Individual Freedom. Governments believe that, when there is a choice between an unpopular tax and a very unpopular expenditure, there is a way out for them, the way toward inflation. This illustrates the problem of going away from the gold standard. Ludwig von Mises. What Mises meant by this is that under a sound monetary system like gold, governments had to be fiscally responsible and avoid printing money to pay for government debts or to pay for new government programs. If it is possible to simply print money, governments will always choose that option, which causes inflation, decreasing the purchasing power of the entire population's money. Should government manage the money supply? The fact that government can control the money supply is generally unquestioned by mainstream economic schools and political parties. It's assumed to be the norm, yet there is no evidence to support the assertion that governments should manage the money supply, and overwhelming evidence showing this always ends in economic disaster. Government control over money has been compared to a drug addiction. It fools its victims with a beautiful high at the beginning, but the come-down is always devastating. Bitcoin has already surpassed the value of most state-backed currencies in the world, and its continued success and steady adoption is strong evidence that governments should not control the money supply. No one can control the supply of Bitcoin, and because of this, it's the best-performing asset of all time. Keynesians and monetarists. Keynesians, based on the ideas of John Maynard Keynes, believe that the government can help to stabilize the economy by increasing or decreasing government spending. Monetarists, based on the ideas of Milton Friedman, believe that the government should target a low and stable inflation rate. Both ideologies believe that governments must expand the money supply, which decreases the purchasing power of everyone in the society. Keynes believed that a recession is caused by animal spirits, and that during a recession, the government should spend even more money on government programs, which will create jobs and cause people to spend more money. Keynesians tried to avoid raising taxes to fight recessions, instead relying on government printing and spending of money. Keynes also hated saving money, because saving money reduced overall spending. By printing more money and debasing the money supply, Keynesians hoped to motivate people to spend their savings, because it's always decreasing in value over time. Monetarists generally oppose spending money to eliminate unemployment. Instead, monetarists prefer to cut taxes to stimulate the economy. They argue that the extra money people get from tax cuts is better spent by citizens than by governments. While the Keynesians and the monetarists have different methods of stimulating economic growth, they both require government spending and increasing the money supply, which in turn lowers the value of everyone's money. Austrian economists, on the other hand, believe that money itself is a good, like any other commodity, and is not outside the free market forces. Money is the most desired and the most easily sold commodity of all. Like all other commodities, money should be strictly limited in supply. If the money supply is limited, it will increase in value over time, forcing governments and citizens to be careful and thoughtful about how it is spent. Bitcoin is the first provably scarce commodity in history, which is why it is such a technological breakthrough and why it is so important. Even gold, which is the second most scarce commodity, has an unknown supply in the Earth's crust. Recently, a deposit of gold was discovered in Africa that would double the supply of gold. This can't happen with Bitcoin. According to the Austrian School of Economics, if the money supply is fixed, which is really only recently possible with Bitcoin, prices of goods and services will decrease over time, causing people to save their money because it will buy more in the future. This also massively de-incentivizes war because of its destructive nature and extreme expense. Unsound money and perpetual war. It is no coincidence that the era of central bank-controlled currency began with the First World War in human history. There are three fundamental reasons that government money incentivizes war. Number one, fiat, or government money, is a barrier to trade between countries because it is not universal and issued by each country's government. Number two, government's ability to print money allows it to print money until its currency completely collapses in value. With sound money, like gold, the government's war efforts were limited to their supply of gold and taxes. Number three, societies with sound money are incentivized to cooperate with other countries because it's in everyone's economic interest to cooperate instead of destroying each other. Limited versus omnipotent government. Liberalism triumphed on the principle that the best government is that which governs the least. Now, for all the Western nations, political wisdom has recast this ideal into liberality. The shift has thrown the vocabulary into disorder. Jacques Barzun. It can be argued that liberalism has been replaced with liberality in the 20th century. Liberalism means that the role of government is to allow citizens to live in liberty, while also suffering the consequences of their own actions. Liberality means that the role of government is to allow citizens to live in liberty, while protecting them from the consequences of doing so. The classical ideal of liberalism is only possible in a system of sound money like gold or Bitcoin, because sound money acts as a natural financial restraint against government authoritarianism and overreach. As long as government operations are limited to tax income, they are restricted to what citizens deem appropriate. When governments can print money infinitely, it doesn't really matter what the citizens want and inevitably leads to an authoritarian government. It's no coincidence that the most horrific tyrants of history operated in a system of unlimited fiat, or government-issued money. Vladimir Lenin, Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong, Adolf Hitler, Pol Pot, Mussolini, Kim Jong-il, and many others are examples of the dangers of this unchecked spending. The Bezzle. Any money that can be easily produced leads to people producing more of it, which in turn drives the value of the money down. There is no societal benefit from increasing the money supply. In free societies, the money which is hardest to produce always ends up being chosen for this reason. The money which was hardest to produce for thousands of years was gold, but now that distinction has been taken over by Bitcoin, which is the first and only provably scarce thing in the world. For both John Maynard Keynes and Milton Friedman, one of the main attractions of abandoning the gold standard was that printing money was far cheaper to produce than mining gold. What they failed to realize was that the high cost of mining gold was a feature, not a bug. The difficulty and expense of mining gold was precisely why it was valuable, and was what kept its supply low relative to all other commodities. In addition, both Keynes and Friedman ignore the real costs of printing money, which was not the physical creation of the paper money, but in the resulting huge increase of borrowing cheap money, causing record amounts of debt. This debt explosion is what economist John Kenneth Galbraith called the Bezzle. The Bezzle is the name which describes the process of huge amounts of embezzlement that occurred in the 1920s, right before the Great Depression. Because loans were so easy to get in the 1920s under the fiat monetary system, huge numbers of unprofitable and fraudulent projects were funded. This led to the Great Economic Crash of 1929, followed by the Great Depression. This would not have been possible under a sound money standard, using gold or Bitcoin as the reserve asset. Be sure to watch the next video in this 10-part series, which will summarize Chapter 8 of the Bitcoin Standard. Chapter 8 is entitled Digital Money, and it explains why Bitcoin is the first provably scarce, completely digital commodity ever created, and how it can solve the problems of sound money, salability, and sovereignty. Please like, subscribe, and check out the next video.